Time to take a full look at the stats for the newest Catan on the block. Enter the Void Dragon. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel, where we're all about getting the most out of our miniatures on the tabletop. In today's video we're going to go over the full rules for the Void Dragon as found in the new Codex Necrons, including his stat line, special rules, the new revamped powers of the Catan, and any ways that we can get more out of him on the tabletop. I must say I'm a really big fan of the miniature, disturbingly creepy with a technological edge, though I have a feeling that this is going to be a miniature that you're really not going to want to stand on accidentally, otherwise you're never going to fix him. It's really quite good to see the Void Dragon represented as a miniature on the tabletop. He's been a part of the Necron backstory for a really long time, a disturbing and powerful ghost in the machine, and he's often thought to be the inspiration behind the Omnissiah, the deity worshipped by the Adeptus Mechanicus. There's believed to be a very big and dangerous shard of the Void Dragon on Mars, and it's believed that this may have stirred the humans on the planet to master new and arcane heights of technology. Of course, this is all complete heresy in the eyes of the Imperium. In any case though, the Catan shards are being deployed on the battlefield, filling the air around them with streams of distorted static, causing the machines of the lesser races to fail and die in its presence. So let's see what the Void Dragon can do on the tabletop. So the Necron Catan shard of the Void Dragon is an elite's choice for Codex Necrons. He costs 18 power level or 350 points, which is the same for the Nightbringer and the Deceiver as well. Each of the Catan can only be fielded once per army, and you can only have one Catan in each detachment, so it does mean you need multiple patrols or something if you wanted to spam them. We've already seen his profile previewed in Warhammer Community. He's movement 8, weapon skill and ballistic skill 2, strength 6, toughness 7, 9 wounds, 5 attacks, leadership 10 and a 3+ save. Maybe not the fastest movement, but he can fly to get over intervening terrain, and is very accurate with his melee and ranged attacks. Ordinarily I'd say this wasn't a very tough profile for such a points intensive model, but I believe that his Necrodermis and Living Metal rules make up for this. He knows 2 powers of the Catan, which he can use to throw some mortal wounds around, which we'll get onto in a bit more detail in a second. He must take the Voltaic Storm power, and can also choose another one, and can cast 2. He's armed with the Spear of the Void Dragon, and Canoptek Tailblades. The spear can either be thrown as a shooting attack, or used to fight in melee. As a shooting attack it's a 12-inch heavy 1 weapon, with strength 9, AP -4, and damage d6. When you shoot it, you draw a line between him and the target, and any units that are within that line get hit by the weapon as well, provided it hits. If the stars or the enemy units align, then it means that you could be getting a whole load of hits with essentially a las cannon. Furthermore, on vehicles it will also do d3 + 3 damage rather than the standard d6. There's a bit of a common theme with this guy, which means that if you're in a vehicle near him, then you'd probably better get out and run away. To be honest, the shooting's fun, but not really the real reason you take him. His main damage output is going to come from melee, and then those Catan powers after that. His Spear of the Void Dragon is again strength 9 in melee, AP -4, damage d6, and again d3 + 3 against vehicles. So he's reasonable against infantry. He'll average about 2 or 3 dead Primaris Space Marines, but again if you get him in combat with a vehicle he's going to absolutely mince them. He'll do on average 13 wounds to a toughness 7 or 8 vehicle in a single round of close combat. That's going to kill the vast majority of battle tanks or dreadnoughts right in one go. He also has some Canoptek Tailblades, which can do a few additional attacks to help clear some infantry out. He gets d6 extra free attacks with these, a strength 6, AP -2 and damage 1. It'll mean there's not really any slouch against hordes and isn't going to get bogged down all that easily either, which I think is a pretty useful thing to have. In general I think you're going to get the maximum efficiency out of him if he's cutting vehicles to little ribbons. In terms of special rules he has a fair few, including the excellent Necrodermis special rule. This means that he can't lose more than 3 wounds in a single phase. It's just a devastatingly powerful rule, and it's really going to make him a nightmare to deal with. If you're playing against an opponent whose only way to damage this guy is through range, then it's going to take a minimum of 4 phases to take this guy out. So he's not going to be dead till turn 4 at the absolute earliest, unless you have another way to damage him, like some sort of melee unit, and even then that assumes that your opponent has firepower to spare to shoot at him every single turn. The reason it'll take 4 phases to take him out is because of his Living Metal special rule. He gets it just the same as the Necron vehicles and things, which means he heals 1 wound per turn. So it means say after you've shot him the first time you'll put him down to 6 wounds, then he'll heal up to 7, so you're going to need another 3 phases worth of damage to kill the guy. The Necrodermis special rule I think sort of makes him like the queen on a chessboard. He's very expensive, but a ridiculously powerful piece, and unlike the queen on a chessboard, you can pretty much guarantee that he's not going to die until he's at least achieved something. There's a lot of power in a 5-turn game of 40k where everyone's scrambling for objectives to have a nigh unkillable star god bouncing around in the midfield killing what he likes with no real way for the opponent to properly deal with him until the later turns of the game. Unfortunately, he does have a bit of a weakness in his Enslaved Star God special rule, which as before means that he can't take a Warlord trait or any relics, but unfortunately it means he can't gain character protection from Lookout Sir for being a character. Honestly, this is quite a big weakness. If you could character protect him as well, then that would be absolutely ludicrous. Though to be honest, I think it was probably a good game decision not to allow him to be character protected, otherwise any sensible Necron player will just shield him for a turn or two, and against the vast majority of lists he's then not going to die until turn 5. So potentially a slight disadvantage not being able to screen him, but honestly I think that Necrodermis and Living Metal make him more than good enough on a survivability front. He does have another way of healing if he kills vehicles. With Matter Absorption, if he does kill a vehicle, then on a 2+ he gains 1 wound healed. That means in combination with Living Metal, if he could rack up a few more wounds over the course of the game, then that could buy him an entire extra phase where he can't be killed. Not the most powerful rule in the world, but occasionally it might make a big difference if you do cross the threshold where he can't be killed for yet another phase. Finally, like all the Catan, he has the Reality Unravel special rule, which means when he dies he explodes on a 4+, and everyone around him takes D3 mortal wounds. Ideally that means that when he's near death, you sort of want him to be nearer the enemy and not necessarily next to a whole load of other Necron units who he's just going to explode all over. In terms of keywords, he is not a core unit as you'd expect. He can fly, he's a monster and also a character. The monster keyword is at least somewhat useful because it means he can throw that Spear of the Void Dragon even in melee. Overall he's a very dangerous generalist unit that isn't going to go down without a fight, dealing damage in multiple phases and being particularly scary against vehicles in melee. So let's go over those powers of the Catan now. There are 6 in the new book. As we said, he knows Voltaic Storm and then can choose one of the other 6. There's Antimatter Meteor, a 24-inch one where on a 3+ the enemy takes 3 mortal wounds, and if you roll a 6+, then they take D3 plus 3. A bit random but very very powerful. There's Time's Arrow, where you select a unit within 18 inches, and if you can roll greater than the wounds characteristic of a model in it, then it automatically kills one model. Could be useful for sniping characters. There's Sky of Falling Stars, which is an anti-horde option. You select 3 units within 24 inches, and if you can roll less than the number of models in the squad for each of them, then you get D3 mortal wounds on them. Not bad, but not very good against more elite armies. Next there's Cosmic Fire, which is units within 9 inches will take D3 mortal wounds on the roll of a 4+. Good for if he is getting stuck in. Seismic Assault, where you pick a big unit and you roll a dice for each model. If you roll a 6+, then they take a mortal wound. And finally the very reliable Transdimensional Thunderbolt, where you pick a unit within 18 inches, on a 2+ the unit takes D3 mortal wounds, and every unit within 3 inches of said unit suffers a mortal wound on the roll of a 4+. For me, I think the most straightforward are Antimatter Meteor for rolling for some very high damage, or Transdimensional Thunderbolt to have some very reliable mortal wound output and also splash some damage around to enemy units nearby. I typically want to start with one of those, and there is a stratagem that can allow you to swap a power of the Catan to one of the others if you are fighting an enemy army that's got a particular target of one type. Maybe if you're fighting a bunch of 30 model hordes, then Seismic Assault might not be a bad one. Or you could perhaps swap to Time's Arrow to have a go at sniping a character perhaps. His own unique one is the Voltaic Storm. You choose one unit within 18 inches, though you can't pick characters with this one. The unit suffers D3 mortal wounds on the roll of a 2+, or D6 mortal wounds if you're attacking a vehicle. And then if the vehicle has a vehicle damage table, then you halve the number of wounds for determining what sort of bracket it's on, so it might be a little bit less accurate. To be honest, if you are facing vehicles, then this one is excellent for the damage profile alone. The halving wounds thing is nice, but I think the biggest thing is the D6 mortal wounds. In any case, it's nice and reliable, which means that you should be reliably putting out somewhere around 4 mortal wounds on any target whatsoever within 18 inches, and significantly more if it's a vehicle. In terms of buffs and synergies for the Catan, they are a little bit limited as they don't really have so much interaction with the other Necron units. Catan don't get didastic codes or command protocols, though you can include them in any detachment and it won't break those rules for other units. Most of the character buffs don't seem to work on the Catan, though it does seem that Orican the Diviner can give them reroll charges, not that I necessarily think that that's a great investment in points, but if he is around anyway for whatever reason, then I guess it could be useful. A few of the stratagems that you can use on Catan are 1 command point for Strange Echoes. This is the one to swap a power in the command phase, which as I said could be used to tailor the powers of the Catan to your opponent, or maybe just use an opportunistic one if the Catan's rushing in. You could swap it to Cosmic Fire just as you jump into the midst of the enemy army and then throw mortal wounds over multiple small units, or maybe think about swapping it to Time's Arrow to try and kill a character perhaps. Next there's Dimensional Destabilization for 1 command point. That allows you to just throw out one other random power of the Catan. Naturally this one's going to be just a bit hit and miss. You don't know what you're getting, it could be really useful, or you could just roll for an effect and get absolutely nothing. Typically though, if you are surrounded with a bunch of enemy units and multiple valuable targets, then you have a very reasonable chance of getting something half decent. When he does make it to melee, Catan can use Entropic Strike. This one's a bit more pricey at 2 command points, but it means that you can just go straight through the enemy's invul saves. So if you are fighting something with an obnoxious invul save, something like a Space Marine Captain with a Storm Shield perhaps, then you can just surprise them and cut straight through it for 2 command points if you do want a very reliable dead character. Could also be very useful for any vehicles that he's tangling with that have a decent invul save to remove a pretty powerful barrier of protection. Next we have Techno-Oracular Targeting for 1 command point. This means that you can auto-wound with 1 attack of his. Typically he will be wounding on 3s anyway with most things, but if you absolutely need to guarantee some damage through, I suppose it could be worth it on his spear, though you could just command reroll it afterwards and still have a very good chance of getting the same effect, maybe without spending a command point. Finally, the good old command point reroll could be very useful for rerolling his charge rolls, and also, as we said, rerolling a wound roll, particularly when he's targeting vehicles, as he has a very good chance of dealing D3 plus 3 damage. For me, I think that it's really sensible to keep Strange Echoes in mind. I think it could well be the best of the bunch if you do swap a power for something really useful at a key time. So in game, I think that the Void Dragon is going to be one of the units that is really going to be a test of skill of the person using them. He's a big investment and potentially very hard to kill, but then you do need to get the damage out of him, while hopefully not allowing your opponent to damage him in multiple phases and getting him cut down early. With his reasonable short movement range and fairly short range, I would try and deploy somewhere fairly forward and central, but also ideally out of line of sight if you possibly can, as it means if you can avoid the opponent being able to shoot him turn 1, then you're essentially buying yourself an extra turn of life. Again, if your opponent's going purely via shooting, then that means that your opponent wouldn't actually be able to kill him until turn 5, when frankly it's far too late. Stopping a phase's damage dealing would be really good. You are going to need to push forward with him though to be able to unleash his damage potential. I'd keep him moving towards the centre of the table, ideally alongside multiple other scary threats, hopefully to divide your opponent's firepower priorities and make hard choices between shooting this guy or trying to deal with another Necron threat that's coming in on them. Naturally he's going to be throwing powers to the katana around, ideally cutting through vehicles with d6 mortal wounds, or hopefully anything else that's got high toughness save or invul saves, and if he can get in position to spear multiple things with that spear, then that's a good thing as well. In terms of melee, I think you're really going to want to try and bully slightly weaker units than him. Try and jump into a unit that you're going to wipe out, so they won't be able to strike back and maybe deal out 3 wounds to you, as it will be quite a silly thing to have one of your phases of damage taking happen on your own turn. I generally aim to scoot around doing chip damage to the enemy army, and then maybe when you think he might be going down anyway, jump in, maybe use the command point to swap to the Catan power of Cosmic Fire, throw out a whole load of mortal wounds all around to the enemy, charge something for a full turn's damage dealing, and then maybe when he goes down he might explode as well to throw even more mortal wounds over the centre of the enemy army. I'd also certainly remember Entropic Strike as well to hopefully cut through a character if he needs to. In terms of competition, he is going to be weighed up against the other Catan, which one advantage to the others is that they're slightly smaller than him in terms of profile and will be easier to hide out of line of sight. They also have slightly smaller bases as well, which means that they might be able to interact with terrain just a little bit more favourably. In terms of their actual stat lines though, the Nightbringer generally has better melee, and also a pretty excellent Catan power in the Gaze of Death, which just throws out a very decent amount of mortal wounds. The Deceiver isn't as good in combat, he's definitely weaker in melee than the Void Dragon, though he has the excellent advantage of being able to redeploy Necron units, which is just such a big deal if you're going second to be able to hide units that were otherwise exposed. His Catan power is a character sniping kind of power, rolling against leadership and hopefully getting a few mortal wounds that way, and he's also innately -1 to hit, which could actually make him tougher than the Void Dragon to ranged firepower. On the Void Dragon's part, he really has a bunch of small advantages. He's got a 3+ save, he's far more powerful against vehicles in all their forms, he gets that matter absorption against them, and he also has his ranged spear attack, which the others don't get. Honestly, I think they all have their merits. I think you would justify either him or the Nightbringer as more of a melee threat, whereas the Deceiver you're taking significant hits in his offensive output for that excellent ability to have the army redeploy on the first turn. Competitively, I still think that we're going to see the Deceiver played a lot for that reason, but to be honest, if you are running 2 detachments, there's no real reason why you couldn't run 2 other things. They are a lot of points, but that Necrodermis rule just means that they're a nightmare to deal with. So let me know what you think of the Void Dragon down in the comments below. Is he living up to expectations, or is the price tag just a bit high? I personally think that they've got him about right. I feel that he's very usable in game, and he's paying a bit of a premium for an absolutely monstrous threat that's really going to cause problems. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. We'll certainly be keeping the Necron unit reviews coming over the next couple of weeks. Feel free to let me know what you want to see next down in the comments. Finally, if you have been watching a fair few of the videos and you'd like to help me keep them coming, I'd just like to quickly mention that the channel has a Patreon page down in the video description below. These videos do take a fair amount of time to make, and if you are enjoying regularly, then any support is massively appreciated. Channel Patrons get to see a new video early each week, there's regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and you also get automatically entered into the channel's monthly prize giveaway with a chance to win some big model kits. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support the channel, then the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.